Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm so incredibly excited to have Aaron Abke with me today. He has a phenomenal YouTube channel that discusses everything from law of attraction to spiritual awakening and the law of one and many other topics. I've been trying to get a chance to talk to Aaron. I finally got a chance and I just can't wait. So welcome, Aaron. How's it going?
Thank you for having me, Brian. I'm super pumped, man.
So first of all, just to get an idea for people that may not have seen your channel, I just wanted to have you tell us a little bit about your experience and where you came, how you came to this point where you wanted to share your message and your spiritual awakening.
Cool, yeah. Well, I started my channel a little over a year ago because I'd had a couple of friends, one in particular who just kept saying, man, you got to start a channel, like a YouTube channel or something. And I never really considered it before, and I sloughed it off a few times. And then it kind of caught my attention, like, oh, that might be fun. Why not? So I made a couple of videos on law of attraction, and nobody watched them. I didn't have any subscribers yet, but I had a lot of fun with it. And so I was like, I'm just going to do this for me because I like it. And so after about 8 months of just posting a video or two a week, I was getting more and more into it. I was going out and filming like in nature with drones and all kinds of fun stuff. And then all of a sudden one of my videos went viral. How to talk to the universe, I think it was.
I think so.
And I was just getting like 1,000 subscribers a day, and people were saying, this is amazing. I've never heard this before. And so I was as shocked as anybody. Like, I didn't think I had anything particularly novel to say, but people tended to think I did. So from that point on, I just have been having a blast with it ever since. And I teach on a very wide variety of topics.
Yeah.
Just because that's fun for me, and I like teaching about different stuff.
You talk about on your channel your awakening. You had grown up in a family that was very ultra-conservative Christian. And so you were in, and I don't want to use the word indoctrinated, but you grew up around some different teachings that kind of guided you to where you were at. And then you chose a different path. And so I wanted to get a little bit of your story on that.
Yeah. Grew up as a pastor's kid in San Jose. My dad was a pastor of a really large and fast growing evangelical church. And so I loved the way I grew up. We had, these crazy revival services all the time. I got to see all kinds of miracles and healings and cool stuff. And it was just kind of normal to me as a kid. And my dad was never a hellfire brimstone preacher. He always taught about the love of God and good stuff like that. So I wasn't really confronted with the bigotry of the Christian religion or the sort of hypocritical theologies until I took my first church job as a full-time worship pastor after college. And the church I was at was very fundamentalist. The first thing that shocked me was that a woman went up on stage one Sunday morning, maybe like the third or fourth week I was there, to give like an offering testimony. And this man was following her and stood behind her with his arms behind his back, like looking stoically, And I was sitting there thinking, what is going on? Why is this guy security guard or something? And then she gets off the stage and they hold hands and go sit down next to each other. And I went, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. This church literally is one of those churches that practices like taking the Bible literally. And, there's all these verses in the New Testament which say that women are inferior to men and they need their husbands as their covering, and don't let women speak in church or it's a shame and all this stuff. And I went, oh my gosh, this is insane. And from there, it just got worse and worse and worse. And they're preaching about hell all the time. And so I had to make a quick decision on, hey, is this the kind of God I want to serve or that I believe in? And the answer was obviously no, this isn't a God that I know at all in my heart. And so I quit my job. I moved back to Oklahoma where I'd gone to college and just sort of devoted my whole life to seeking my own truth. Started listening to Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, people like that, reading The Course in Miracles. And, my spirituality shifted really rapidly. I talk with a lot of people on my channel who've been almost like in limbo for many, many years. They don't know what they should believe or what resonates. And so they're coming to me for guidance. But for me, it was like an immediate shift. Like as soon as I left the bigotry of religion behind, it was like, all right, anything's possible and truth is universal. Oneness is the nature of the universe and all that stuff. So that's kind of what I teach on mostly now on my channel.
Yeah. You have some pretty interesting and great teachings about the concept of hell that I'm just so glad that you put out there in a way that's easier for other people to understand. It always bothered me that if I understood infinity, it's less than a millisecond my life is, and I might make a choice and I'm going to be punished for eternity because of that little moment in time. And the fact that there would be a God that would punish me for eternity, the concept that he would create a universe where you have a millisecond of time, and as soon as you're done, if you make a single mistake, then you are doomed for hell. It was
barbecue pit for you.
Right. It was so completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it continued to bother me, and it was still being held up against me that you're going to go to hell because of this, and so your explanation is fantastic. So,
thank you.
So, but you went through a period where you kind of go through what you said, the wilderness stage, from when you went from the church to your, and so I have a lot of people that I talk to, even clients that are going through something similar. So I wanted to talk about that. Once you start to become aware and kind of change your spirituality a little bit, you go through a phase where you're kind of alone, and it's even more comfortable to be alone, and people don't understand that, and they struggle with it. And you had a really good explanation. I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great topic because, they're not even just Christian religion, but any person that comes from a certitude or something who opens their paradigm to what's possible will probably experience a period of fear about, the unknown, fearing the unknown. And I liken it to, like you're floating in outer space and you've been clinging to this little boulder, the whole time thinking, oh, I have total certainty, I have all the answers. Right. And then you realize it's just a little boulder in the vastness of, unimaginable space and emptiness and void in all directions, infinity, right? Mm-hmm. And you suddenly feel the weight of infinity and what the implications of that might mean. And so the ego goes crazy for a little while because its whole belief system is being confronted, its sense of safety and comfort is being assaulted, and it's natural. It's something you have to go through. But you come out of the other side of that fire, it sort of burns away all of the falsities and the things that you had believed to be true, the things you believe to be true about yourself that aren't. Mm-hmm. And, it's only going through that fire that you can purify all those sort of distortions you've been carrying around. And then you come to see that actually infinity only implies oneness and unity and love, and the nature of the universe is oneness, and that's the best possible realization you can have. But it was the other side of the coin that gave you certainty, quote unquote certainty, that actually blinded you from seeing the true nature of reality. And so it's a natural process. And if anyone listening is going through that process now, I would just say, strap in your seatbelt and ride it out, because it's an inevitable part of deprogramming the mind.
Right.
Just know that on the other side is a freedom that you cannot possibly imagine. And you'll look back saying it was worth every second of fear and uncertainty I experienced to get to this point.
So the law of attraction, you have some great teachings on the law of attraction on your channel. And it's just so exciting to talk about. There was a point in time that you realized, wow, this is real. This law of attraction thing is real. I wanted to get your perspective on when you first came to terms with that this is this real thing, that you started to play around with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, it was the teachings of Jesus that opened my eyes to the law of attraction. Jesus, to me, is the first law of attraction teacher.
Right.
I don't find anyone before Jesus really talking about these principles of manifestation and belief becomes reality and things like that. Mm-hmm. But man, when you read those red letters, right, Jesus was talking about it all the time. And in fact, almost everything he says can be some variation of law of attraction. And so I just, I started listening to a little bit of law of attraction stuff. I watched The Secret many, many years ago. And so I knew the concept of law of attraction. But once the phrase, when you change the way you look at something, mm-hmm, the thing you're looking at changes.
Right.
That's kind of what happened with Jesus for me, is when I stopped putting him in this little box of fundamentalism and allowed him to be a person just like me, who clearly had some kind of cosmic consciousness experience of his oneness with the divine, and so profoundly that he actually spoke through that paradigm. I and my Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. All of a sudden, I could relate to him in a way that I had not been able to before. And so I saw his teachings in a whole new light. And, when he said things like, whatever you pray for, believe that you have already received it and it shall be yours. I went, that's law of attraction.
Right.
That's just basic law of attraction.
Right.
So yeah, from there I just, branched out a bit to other teachers, and of course Abraham Hicks and Neville Goddard and all that. And I think just through the process of teaching about it myself, living it myself, you have to teach from your own experience, That's the best way to teach. And so I try to teach only from what I've experienced firsthand rather than just head knowledge. And that seems to go over really well on my videos.
Yeah, I would say that law of attraction has made me more of a Christian. I've come back to Christ, and I'm more of a Christian than I was before because of that. So I wanted to get your perspective on, you mentioned Neville Goddard and his amazing interpretation of the Bible.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm reading the Bible, and it's way more interesting. It has secrets built into it. What was your impression when you started to read his discussion of the Bible and the way that he viewed the Bible as this incredible explanation of the secrets of the universe, kind of?
Yeah, absolutely blown away.
Yeah.
Not just the revelations that he discusses, but the time period in which he was teaching this stuff.
Can you imagine? It sounds like he's talking right now.
It does.
Yeah.
And I mean, I sometimes, not so much now, but did have a lot of fear about teaching certain things because I had a pretty large progressive Christian audience. And as you may know, some of them are a little bit slower to die to some of the old fundamental or legalistic points of view. And so they're all for you when you're teaching about, hell and stuff. But then as soon as you get into, maybe some of the Neville Goddard stuff and imagination creates reality, they'll go, oh, you're new age, you're woo-woo, that's Satanism and stuff. So I even had fear teaching this stuff, but I would listen to Neville Goddard teaching this back in the, 50s or something
right.
like that?
40s, 50s, around then, right? And
I was like, man, I need to sack up here and have some balls, right? Because this guy was doing this back in the freaking 50s when, the modern day person was, almost all of them were very religious and fundamentalist. Right. And he's not ashamed at all. He goes for it, hook, line, sinker.
Yeah.
And listening to him talk about certain concepts, like very Joseph Campbell-esque stuff, archetypes from the Bible, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, the prophets, looking at those people as actually states of consciousness.
As if they're us. They're states that we can beat.
Yes.
Right.
We access these states because in truth, like Moses was a person who accessed a state of consciousness, the savior complex or whatever, the Messiah. And he lived that state of consciousness, or it came through him. You'd say he manifested that state. Abraham, the father of the faith, the prophets, all these people are actually states in consciousness that are available to you and I. And the essence of manifestation is to see it inside yourself first. And then once you see it in yourself, the natural result is that it becomes manifest in physical reality. So that's pretty revolutionary stuff for the 50s.
It's the fearlessness. I mean, you're pretty fearless, like right now, and with some of the stuff you're saying, considering where you're coming from. Imagine back then, this dude's getting up on the radio and saying this stuff. It's amazing.
I can't imagine what he put up with.
Yeah, I've never really heard the reaction. Like, was there some kind of, you don't hear about that. Was there some kind of protest? He was doing it in California, so maybe it was a little bit more relaxed here, but I don't know. I mean.
Well, he actually talks about it sometimes.
Yeah, I haven't maybe gotten to those teachings, some of the protests that he's had for his teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few lectures where he mentions people who say things about him. He's like, some people say that I'm teaching this or that.
Right.
He doesn't go into super huge detail on it because I think, again, he was a law of attraction sort of master. So he knew I'm not going to focus on this stuff or I'll create more of it. But he does mention it a little bit, which is interesting.
So many questions. How can anybody interview her? So if you're going to now that you've developed your law of attraction, before we go any further, is there some cool technique? I mean, there's right now, if somebody goes on YouTube, there's a million interviews and videos about the law of attraction. So when everybody goes on their own journey, they find little unique things for themselves that they've come from law of attraction that has really applied in their own life. I like to get ideas of that. Have you had something that, some technique or experience that was kind of related to the law of attraction that you can share with us that maybe a little bit different than what other people might have heard or digested when they deal with this material?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I see the law of attraction quite differently than most people do who teach on it. Because in my personal experience, the law of attraction has never been something I've used to manifest all my desires and make the perfect dream life.
Right.
But it's been the most powerful tool for my spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And it's been very clear to me, I don't know, maybe just intuitively, that the law of attraction is, the way it's taught is that it's this tool for creating whatever you want and achieving all your desires. But I see it more as that's the means to the end, in a way.
Right.
What the law of attraction was actually put in place for by the source consciousness is to aid in the expansion of consciousness.
Right.
And the idea is that we would see our desires reflected out in the universe and be able to get a better contrast or context for what it is we're desiring. And those desires would birth new desires. And as this process plays out, it sort of takes you a step back closer and closer to yourself until you come to the final realization that I am everything I'm looking for, and nothing outside of me can actually give me what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Everything that I manifest doesn't actually give me lasting fulfillment. And so I manifest a new thing and then a new thing. And as I do this, you can kind of watch people do this, actually, especially in the LOA community. It's a bit funny for me, in a good way, like a cool way.
Right.
That you'll see somebody who wants to manifest a car, right? And like, I have a really good friend who's like, the Lamborghini is what I want.
Right.
And I'm like, it's actually not what you want, but you don't know that yet.
Right.
So, they manifest the Lamborghini, and it's great. It's so exciting for like a week or two, and then it starts to wear off. And then each desire becomes slowly more and more like non-physical or more spiritual. Like, I want to open a business that helps people is the next thing, right?
Right.
And then that happens, but there's still this bit of discontentment inside. There's something that still isn't satisfied. And so then maybe I start doing yoga or meditation, and I want to manifest a non-dual state of consciousness, right? And as time goes on, these desires become less external and more internal.
Right.
And it's this machine of law of attraction that's just kind of inherently built into the universe that is making sure that everyone's on this conveyor belt, so to speak, of being led to the realization that you are actually what you've always wanted, and everything you do desire comes from inside of you. And so we think it's the object we want, with the job, the relationship, the car, the house, but actually the objects of our desire are nothing more than symbols that represent the essence of what we really want. So
well, yeah, that's so well explained. I love that.
And it's very obvious, right?
Right.
Like, it's not really the relationship you want, because let's say you find the perfect partner and everything's great and peachy keen for 6 months. And then all of a sudden they become abusive and they cheat on you and manipulative. And then you can't get rid of them fast enough. Get this, I hate this relationship. So it was never the relationship you wanted, but the love that you believed it would bring you. Mm-hmm. So actually, law of attraction says, if I feel the love I want now, the essence of what I want, then material reflections of that essence will be drawn to me.
Right.
So you don't even have to visualize the exact thing you want, but as Neville Goddard would say, live as if it's already the case. Mm-hmm. The end is where you begin. Live as if you have the love, feel the love inside of you, and then you'll just find that things that reflect love to you are drawn to you. Right.
So a really popular topic on my channel that people will definitely make sure that I ask you questions about. And I don't know if you've read about it. Have you read anything about reality transurfing?
Little bits and pieces.
Okay. And it's okay. It's even better if you haven't. So these are questions related to it. So a couple, I want to get your impression if we game plan this out. there is the law of balance. We clearly see it in nature. There is a balance. The planets are round, water always goes to level. We can see it with energy. Is the law of balance more powerful than the law of attraction? Clearly they're interacting. Some people have told me they're the same thing, but there is this law of balance that we're dealing with when we're dealing with the law of attraction. And I wanted to get your impression on that.
That's a great question. I do think that they're not different laws.
Okay.
Here's the way that I see reality. There's a lot of people that, and you know, it's not like it's ill-intentioned or something, but there's a lot of, you know, manifestation experts who have YouTube channels that pump out a video every day of law of attraction. And they're teaching things like, you are manifesting every single second of your existence all the time, right?
Right.
You're shifting to parallel realities every millisecond, and so everything that appears is your attraction. And so in my experience, that paradigm just creates a lot of anxiety. And I don't
even if it's true.
Even if it is true.
Right. But
I don't believe it's a very accurate way of looking at the universe.
Okay.
I think that, you know, you could speak on the relative level, me in this little body, in this little lifetime. Mm-hmm. From this perspective, am I consciously generating everything that happens to me? No. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. I can't think billions of times a second, right?
Right.
So really, from this relative perspective, I'm just a part of the flow of life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, quantum mechanics shows us that everything is the universe itself is a field of probability.
Right.
Which, you know, the observer effect demonstrates this, that whatever manifests in physical reality is what was most likely to manifest.
Right.
Based upon the variables that were present, based upon all the sequence of events that happened before it. And this is sort of the essence of living from acceptance, like in Eastern philosophy and Zen Buddhism and all that. We live from acceptance simply because it's just the recognition that resisting life is totally futile. Because right. Whatever is manifesting now had to manifest. So you could think about it like every wave has the whole ocean behind it. Mm-hmm. So why would I slap at the wave and punch at the wave and resist right. the wave, right? It's actually just a manifestation of what the ocean's doing. And so I look at life like a field of probability, and there's all these different, you know, infinite amounts of probabilities that could manifest, but whatever is appearing right now is what was most likely to appear.
Right.
That's what the observer effect is.
And I've used that teaching of yours multiple times, the idea that there's a probability field and we're working towards the highest probability. So the other concept in transurfing, and I want to get your perspective of it, is the pendulum, not the pendulum, but the idea that when our thoughts, when a group of people think about something, they create almost a separate entity, an energetic entity, not necessarily a social memory complex, which is talked about. We'll talk about that in a second in Law of One. We know that mutual thoughts and consciousness can create another consciousness, but we're interacting with these pendulums that feed on our energy. They can be political groups, they can be just two people, they can be organizations or groups or things, just these entities, and they feed on our entity and our energy. And so we're not alone solipsistically in the universe. We're interacting with everybody's probability fields. And then when people think together, that can pull us away, that can pull us into certain realities or manifestations do you understand Mike's explanation?
Yes.
So I wanted to get, if you've ever thought about that, game planned it out, okay, if we're all creating reality, then there's some kind of synthesis that occurs, and there may be separate entities that start to exist. They may not be conscious, but they may be pulling us or affecting our energies or all kinds of things. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I think that saying you're manifesting everything at every second of your life is a bit silly.
Right.
Because my right and my free will to manifest doesn't usurp your right to manifest and your free will to exercise what you choose to do, right? So right. It's all, every person is a localization of free will expressing itself, which means that no single individual entity has total autonomous free will.
Right.
So we have sort of relative free will. I have a field of possibility around me that I can sort of make decisions about, but I don't have the total choice of what happens because I'm not the only entity in the universe.
Right.
So like if I go to the bank and someone robs the bank, a manifestation expert might say, well, you were a match to getting a bank robbed, so you better do some self-work. That's why you manifested that, right?
Right.
But the truth is that, from a relative level, did I manifest being a part of a bank robbery? Well, you could say yes, but simply because I stepped out of my house and went to the bank, which opened a probability vortex that there is a possibility somebody could rob that bank. And so if the other variables in the universe organized in the right way, that person got up that day saying, I'm going to go rob a bank, chose which bank to rob, we could have met in that moment. And so you could say, well, yeah, I did manifest it, because if I hadn't gone to a bank, I wouldn't be a match to getting robbed at a bank.
Right.
But the idea can be put forward like it's your fault.
Right.
And that's what I have a problem with, because it causes people to live with a sense of anxiety.
Right.
Sort of self-deprecating thoughts of like, oh, I should have done better. I should be more in alignment, da-da-da-da-da. And it's much more holistically beneficial to live from a place where you say, okay, the flow of life is happening. I have no way to predict what's going to happen. I'm just going to stay in alignment with my true nature, which is peace, which is clarity. And whatever happens in my life, I will accept it. I'll do the best I can with it, but I'm not going to take personal credit for everything that happens in my life, because that's what the ego does. The ego is the entity in your mind that says, I'm in control. I'm the controller. Which, if you believe that, then you're going to be loaded up with guilt. You're going to live with guilt all the time, because if a bad outcome manifests, I'm responsible, or they're responsible, so F them and attack them, right? But if you understand I'm not in control of the flow of life, then the ego can't invest you with guilt every time something bad happens. And so you live from this state of acceptance. And the state of acceptance is being in alignment.
Right.
That's all alignment is. Alignment isn't nothing bad ever happens, only good things happen.
Right.
Because that's not reality. Reality is a probability field. So sometimes a bad probability happens.
Right.
Alignment means I accept whatever happens, because it's a state of inner alignment with life. I'm not resisting life or saying it shouldn't be happening. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. So almost to the law one. We're going to first, next thing, I want to talk about two interesting things, and that's the Course in Miracles and the Law of One. Before we go into that, I want to get your perspective of channeled entities. Even in the Law of One, when they ask Ra about, they ask about the other channeled book, Urantia, and he's like, "Oh, Urantia, that was just some earth spirit that did." There may be some entities. How do you? Because the Course in Miracles is from a channeled entity, obviously. I believe that it's from Jesus, but it's definitely from a spirit that's very similar in his state of Christ that she's channeling, and then the Law of One. So, and then of course Abraham. And so, what is your perspective? How do you evaluate a channeled entity? What is your impression? What is your feeling about channeled entities in general, and how do you assimilate the information that you get from them?
Well, this is actually why I'm such a big fan of Course in Miracles and Law of One, because there's actually a lot of crossover between the two texts.
Right.
I'm sure, as you're familiar, Ra speaks about Jesus on like 4 separate occasions.
Right.
And he calls him Yahushua, was his actual historical name.
Right.
But they ask him, what's Jesus up to now? Because Ra explains, he was a 4th density soul who chose to incarnate as a wanderer on earth, to be of service in this unique way, to basically be a catalyst for this world religion to evolve into the next state. Right. And so he knew he was coming to be a martyr and all of that. And so they say, okay, well, where is this entity now? And he says something like he is in the process of learning the ways of 5th density. Right.
He's learning about healing or 5th density. Something. I remember that comment. He's still learning. He's in his, right now. He's in the process of learning, right?
Yeah. He's now in the 5th density, beginning his learning. Right. And, 5th density is the density of wisdom. And if you read A Course in Miracles, it's like the most classic 5th density text you'll ever find. Right. And if you want to know what the essence of 5th density is like,
Course in Miracles.
Read A Course in Miracles. That is exactly what you will be learning at some point. I mean, you can learn it now, but when you are in 5th density, or if you're a 5th density wanderer and you return to that after this incarnation, I mean, that's sort of the program you're on. It's all about learning the difference between truth and illusion.
Right.
And that's why the Course can be a little bit triggering for a lot of people.
Right.
Because it's like, hey, guess what? There's truth and illusion, and there's no difference. And so if you are believing something that's causing suffering, that's because it's not true. And people who have this identity of, I am my traumas, and don't tell me I wasn't really a victim. They want to hang on to that identity so much. The Course is like, well, you're not a victim. Sorry. It doesn't make any apologies, So It's very fifth density, kind of lacking a bit in the love, compassion area, but purposefully so.
Right.
So I really like those two texts in that way. But to answer your question, I don't really look at channeling like they're channeling or they're not.
Right.
Because it's more complicated than that. It's sort of like, it's just like a radio in a sense. You can get a clear signal. You can get a muddy signal. You can get a signal with a lot of static, and you can faintly hear what the signal is saying or the voice on the other side. And so when you listen to entities like Abraham or Bashar, there's different levels of channeling.
Right.
And when you're reading the Law of One or Course in Miracles, you're like, damn, this is so accurate that this person who's channeling had to be just completely MIA. Like they couldn't be standing on a stage with a mic in their hand, walking around teaching a conference, because they need to be finely tuned to receive this level of information.
Right.
And so a lot of people will say, oh, when you compare what Abraham says to Ra, it's like, no, it's like night and day. But that doesn't mean Abraham's not channeling.
Right.
It just means she's maybe channeling a wideband vortex or wideband signal. And so she's getting impressions from a higher source, and she's translating what she's feeling on the inside into human words. And so it's not like this is exactly what the entity on the other end is saying.
Right.
Because the entities on the other end don't actually speak physical language. The
channel is an interpreter, essentially.
Yes, exactly right. Okay. They're interpreting channels of energy that are symbolically giving them intuitions and feelings and inspirations that will lead them to say things that are very accurate according to that inspiration. But they're not like a game of telephone, like listening to someone talking, which is kind of how it's seen. But when you get to something like Law of One, Carla had to go into a very deep trance to speak with Ra. And Ra actually says in the very beginning, he says, the reason we have difficulty finding people to channel this information is because we send a very narrow band signal.
Right. I mean, it's so specific. They're telling them you need to light the incense at this angle, and you need to light the candle. There's Ra's giving instructions at the beginning.
Yep.
It's so specific. It's very interesting compared to other channelers.
Yeah.
So before we get to Law of One, because I know that's going to be a long one, the Course in Miracles, if you wanted to, the thing that strikes me the first time I read it a long time ago, it's got that Christian terminology. That is one of the triggering things when you read it. It's biblical. It has biblical language to it, and some people, it's such a long book and they find it confusing. So if we were to summarize the message a little more than just saying that it's talking about forgiveness,
right?
Is there something beyond just the simple message that we already know that Christ, that is in the Bible, that the Course in Miracles really brings to us? If somebody on the street, you were to explain it to them, how would you best explain the message of the Course in Miracles?
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense to me that Christ, the person who was physically incarnated as Jesus 2,000 years ago, might actually be the entity giving the Course material. The Course doesn't say, I'm Jesus, and let me tell you. It never does,
right.
But it says things like, this is what I meant when I said, love thy neighbor as thyself, and things like that.
Right.
So, the way that social memory complexes work is a bit difficult for us to understand. When you truly merge consciousness with others, then it might be a different, soul entity speaking for Jesus, let's say, but it's not a violation of any kind because their consciousness is merged. So it's like, I have full, complete understanding of you and what you would say and how you would say it because I am you now. So I can kind of speak for you. And it's not like, it's totally authentic, right?
Right.
There's no difference to them at that level. So it makes sense that Jesus would be the one giving that material, in my opinion, because in the same way that Ra says, we felt obligated to come back and relay this message again, like we did to the Egyptians, many years ago, because it was distorted. Our message was distorted, and so we felt obligated to correct those distortions, which is why we've been searching for channels like you for so long. I feel like Christ would probably do the same thing, right? With the message of the gospel.
Makes sense. Wouldn't you want to? The way that it's been misinterpreted, if you started going, oh my gosh, they're saying all this stuff. Please, somebody out there, can I this is what I meant.
He's like, I was using Gehenna as a symbolic example for suffering, and they turned it into this weird concept of hell. Like, geez.
So, yeah, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be like, okay, I need to find somebody I can channel this, and maybe a little bit of my message could get through. So, yeah,
that's actually sort of the concept of karma.
Right.
That Ra talks about, like a wanderer who incarnates into third density can become karmically involved if they're not careful, right? Like the sort of a risk that they take is they might become karmically involved, meaning they might commit some serious errors that they will feel obligated to return again into another lifetime to fix that mistake.
So just so people understand, the concept of the wanderer is discussed in the Law of One, and that's just that they're souls that come back and go backwards in density with certain purposes and messages, correct? They have certain intentions in doing so.
Yeah, if you know what a star seed is, the term star seed, it's essentially a star seed. Right. Someone who chooses to go back, and we'll get into this later, but goes sort of back to a stage they've already gone through, to be of service to others, which helps them to spiritually polarize and all that. That's what kind of a wanderer is.
All right, so the Law of One, I'm going to put a link to your playlist. You have 4 really good videos. Hopefully you got more coming. I've never heard somebody explain the Law of One as clearly as you do. I have not talked about it very much on my channel. Usually what happens when people say, okay, tell me about the Law of One. Here's a playlist I want you to check out, because you do a really good job of kind of summarizing it. Because as you say, this is doctoral level metaphysics that we're discussing. But when you go back and start reading it, there's a feeling I have that this is real. There's a part of me that says, it's like I already knew this on some level. So for the people that have never heard of the Law of One, I'm going to tell you to pause the interview right now and go and look at those. Go in and look at the link that I'll provide, and maybe I'll put a card here for that as well. But I want you to give your best so people can join in this discussion and understand what the Law of One is.
Yeah. The best video to watch is the 7 densities for sure.
Right.
Because it kind of explains the whole premise of Law of One, really. But the idea is that, the biggest question that plagues the average person is like, what's the purpose of all this?
Right.
Why are we here? What is going on? Why is there something rather than nothing? And the Law of One is all about answering those questions, really. Mm-hmm. What the Law of One says is that there is one source, the one infinite creator, one mind, one intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and it is the only being that exists. There's one mind in the universe. And so this one mind has no contrast. There's no other entity it can have a conversation with to know what it's like. So how is it going to know what it's like? Well, it has to create physical reality. And all of physical reality serves as a sort of mirror to allow the source to experience what it is like.
Right.
But the other interesting caveat is that the one source is infinite. So there is no end to the varieties of experiences it can have. And so the universe is eternal for that reason. It has always been happening and it always will happen. And it's all a way for the source to know itself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll have people that have trouble with this concept and say, well, if it's infinite intelligence, why does it need to know itself? Shouldn't it already know itself?
Right.
And the answer is a bit complicated, because the answer is yes, it already does know itself, because it's always been knowing itself. Mm-hmm. It's a bit tricky metaphysically to wrap your head around, but that's what infinity or eternity implies, is that it simultaneously does know itself and is always knowing itself. Like the physical universe that's happening now has always been happening. So there never was a time where the source was like, I'm so lonely. I want to know myself. What should I do? I'll create physical reality, right?
Right.
You could almost say that knowing itself is what it is, if that makes sense.
It's like it's binging a bunch of different Netflix,
It's
right?
binging itself.
It's constantly binging. It needs more and more. Give me more experience all over the place, kind of a little bit like that, right? That's how it's rediscovering and knowing itself constantly, a little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of like I like it to use the analogy of a box of chocolates, and it's sort of tasting all the chocolates, and its essential nature is oneness. It's unity. It is perfect. It's complete. It lacks nothing. Infinity implies no lack.
Right.
The lack is the only thing that can't exist. And so its fragrance of its nature is peace and love and oneness and unity, right?
Right.
But it can't know what that's like experientially without the contrast of the polarity of that.
Right.
So you could think of it
Makes
like food, right? Like there's two ways to know what food you like. You can just eat food you like, but when you eat a food you don't like, you get a different appreciation for the food you do like. Mm-hmm. Or if you think about if you've ever gone on a missions trip, right? Mm-hmm. You think, I don't need a missions trip to appreciate my life. Well, sort of true, but go on a missions trip to a third world country and you'll come back with this extreme level of gratitude.
Right.
Right. And so you could see that as kind of what the source is doing. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not because the source needs to know itself or else it's lacking something. It doesn't work like that. It's sort of like the source is the knowing itself, if that makes sense.
There's a feeling you get when you read the Law of One of the playfulness of source. It wants to create and explore new things constantly on such a level beyond anything that we can. So it's constantly, here's some of my power. I want you to, I get a little bit of that.
Yes.
So when you come out of reading this, it's this incredibly massive, almost science fiction opera that is occurring in the universe that would make for like this incredible movie that, better than the Jedi and the Sith, just amazing that is happening. So explain first of all, the interesting concept is the Logos. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I've read channeled works from ascended masters by like Dion Fortune, and they're mentioning the Logos. It's something that has been mentioned before in other works. So the idea is, I'll have you explain it, but the sun, the planets, the solar system, each become their own independent entity on some level, as if they are conscious beings.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
So when I look up at the sun right now, I'm thinking, what is the sun thinking? Well, what is Uranus or Neptune or all these? Every planet has its own consciousness. That's at least what I'm getting, which is a fascinating concept.
Yes.
It's amazing.
It is.
It reminds me of Ian Banks had a book called The Culture, where these massive starships that were super intelligent, they would interact with each other. And I've always tried to game plan it. Imagine what these, because I'll have you explain it, because first of all, explain that the sun is given its own little solar system, and it creates like a playground. All the different planets and the archetypes, and am I getting that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it's kind of its own little playground. The sun itself is creating its own solar system and universe, and it has. So the implication is that these planets are, and when they have something happen, the sun shares its information with the universe, kind of like the universal internet, the Akashic record, right? That's occurring. So when we do something, the sun shares it, the whole universe knows, and this is constantly going on with every solar system all over.
Yes,
right.
That's exactly right. The way that it works, if you think about it like a game,
right?
And let's say you are the one infinite creator with infinite possibilities. You can do whatever you want, but you want to create a game that feels authentic and organic.
Right.
You want it to feel like a real experience, because nothing you create is actually real. Only you are real.
Right.
Right. Absolutely speaking. So you have to create the illusion of a real game. So how do you do that? Well, the first obvious step is that anything you create in the game is you. Mm-hmm. So if you know it's you, it loses all of its symbolism and meaning.
Right.
It's meaningless to you, right? Because you already knew what you're doing and all that stuff. So to make a game that appears to have a certain rule set means that you have to cut off, the source essentially cuts off a portion of its consciousness in memory and places itself in the game and just keeps doing that layer upon layer upon layer. So it stacks these layers of the game to create this experience where it's looking up at itself from all these different vantage points and going, whoa, I see what I'm like. Because if it's just itself, it doesn't actually know what oneness is.
Right.
Because it is itself. It has no context. So it creates an illusion of separation, which is what the Course in Miracles talks about. All separation's illusion.
Right.
And that illusion or that boundary it puts in place of the forgetting that Ra talks about gives it the ability to look up through that veil and see itself from a unique vantage point and have a different understanding. And so that's kind of what the concept of the Logos is that the Creator makes the universe in layers. It's not like what the religion has taught us in, the book of Genesis that says, let there be, boom, and everything just appears. Right. The Creator actually does not poof anything into existence. Everything is created through evolution, through a cyclical process.
Now, you had a biblical quote. Now, the common one is, in the beginning was the Word, but there's also portions of the Bible that say, in the beginning was the Logos. So they're saying the Logos is the Word. That's probably a different interpretation of the Logos, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Ra says that the Logos is he says all of creation is a part of one original thought.
Right.
And so that thought projects itself down many layers of density.
Correct.
Which creates almost like you can think of like layers on a cake or something that creates this expanded universe with dimensions, right? And so once it has dimensions, time and space, it can move around or have the illusion of moving around.
Right.
Everything is happening inside of its own mind, exactly the same way as a dream at night. You dream, you project a portion of your consciousness. You localize a little bit of your consciousness. You might know, my name is Brian. I'm a person. You keep a few of the elements, but you forget about your kids, your wife, your family, your house, your car, your job. You don't take any of that with you on purpose because you want to have a different experience where you can be running away from a dragon or whatever's happening in the dream, right? So you have to keep that veil of forgetting or else the whole dream falls apart and none of it's taken seriously any longer. And so everything in the dream is actually you. It's your mind. It's all happening inside of your mind, right?
Right.
And so you're setting up this experience. So it's really an unbelievably intelligent process that's been put in place. And so, the sun is, I think actually galaxies, Ra says, is the first Logos, a star system, a star cluster that is its own intelligence.
Right.
So it keeps a portion of the Creator's infinite intelligence, limited to a certain parameter. And then inside of itself, it creates stars. Stars are the sub-Logos.
Right.
And the star itself retains a portion of the galaxy's intelligence and puts in place a solar system, creating planets from its own organic materials. Those planets become a sub-Logos.
Right.
Within the planet now, a portion of the sun's intelligence. It creates weather and plant life, mineral life, chemical life, human life. And each life on that planet is a sub-Logos.
Right.
And so this is why Jesus said, I and my Father are one, because he recognized I'm actually just an extension of the source's intelligence.
It's just a beautiful thing to imagine the infinity of this creation and all of the different variable possibilities when you imagine it. It's exciting to think about that.
Not only is it exciting, but to me, it's the most freeing spiritual experience you can have. It's what they call cosmic consciousness, right?
Right.
When you open your awareness to the variables that are out there that you had been closed off to, the only feeling that ever happens is this feeling of wonder and awe and almost reverence and peace. When you realize, okay, great, like my little tiny life is not the only thing that exists.
Right.
And anytime you feel depression or fear or anxiety, it's always because your parameters are too narrow. You're just seeing one little funnel. And so that's the only thing that exists to you. And so you're taking it so seriously. But the law of one expands your awareness of who you are to this infinite level. to where you go, okay, whatever happens in my life is not the end all be all.
Right.
There's there's infinite experiences to be had. And so I'll just do the best I can with what I have, knowing that it doesn't define me in any way. It's not the only experience I'll ever have. I have thousands of more lifetimes, and I've already had thousands of lifetimes. So you stop taking your life so damn seriously, and that actually frees you to explore and create yourself in a way that you cannot do when you're living in the rigid confines of fear, right?
How small would a concept of God be that he or she just created one planet, and this is it, that God's only creation was this one planet? And I have met people that I care about that will argue with me beyond anything hey, there's no other life in the universe. It says it in the Bible. This is the only place where life exists. And how can you imagine? If you were God, would you only have one planet? Would you? It's a question that I want to have answered. Of course not, right?
Well, the reason that they can't accept that there's other life in the universe is because if they do, they have a lot of other questions to answer.
Right.
Like, okay, did Jesus die for all of their sins too?
Right.
That's a tough one.
It's a tough one, yeah.
It immediately eliminates all of the religious fallacies that they've been holding so dear. So they just simply can't afford to accept that idea. And I understand that.
I get where they're coming from, yeah. So just talk about densities a little bit. Most of the Earth is in a third density, like animals and dogs are like kind of second density, right?
Right.
By the way, you have one of the cutest dogs of all time. So
yeah, he's pretty cute.
He's pretty awesome. So then fourth density is just explain the fourth, fifth, and sixth densities as described by Ra in the Law 1 as best you can. Just so when we start talking about it, people know what we're talking about. Right.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated, but it's also pretty simple.
Right.
In a way, kind of like everything in the universe.
Right.
It sort of describes the progression of how consciousness evolves. I mean, you can see that this is true just in your own life, right? You can just isolate this little, 30 years that I've been alive and see, has my consciousness evolved? You can say, okay, I used to have these beliefs in place. I used to believe these things about myself. Life brought me new experiences that challenged those beliefs through suffering and contrast. And I was forced to see myself in a new light and leave those old beliefs behind. And I expanded my awareness of who I am. So you can see the evidence that obviously consciousness evolves just in your own life. Mm-hmm. The you that you are now is so vastly different than you at 10 years old or 5 years old.
Right.
And the you'll be at 80 years old will be a much more expanded version. And so it's a bit of a paradox to say consciousness evolves because consciousness is just pure awareness. But it's just a concession to the limitations of language that your soul is a frequency in consciousness, mm-hmm. a unique vibration that is going through the contrast of physical incarnation. And all of physical incarnation that's happening is like a virtual reality game mm-hmm. that is allowing your soul's frequency to increase its vibration, its rate of vibration, which allows the faster you could say a frequency vibrates, the more expanded it becomes, the more it can take in or absorb of the universe and the creator's true nature. So the reason that consciousness wants to increase its vibratory rate is to aid in the learning process or knowing process of the universe, of the creator. So it's a pretty simple concept that consciousness mm-hmm. incarnates into these dreams or these incarnations to learn and expand itself and gain new experiences. And so it does that through the process of densities. And so a density is, if you think about what a density is in a physical way, mm-hmm. Everything, science explains that everything actually is light. Even, right. Physical objects are just light in an entangled quantum relationship. And so the slower the vibratory rate of the light is, the more dense and hard and slow the object appears. And the faster its vibratory rate, the more ethereal and, fast moving it appears to be. But it's all just light on a spectrum of density. Mm-hmm. So you can think of it like water. When water is frozen, it's at a much slower density, which means it's hard, it doesn't move, right? And then if you speed up the vibratory rate of the H2O, it becomes liquid, and it can move around. And then if you continue to speed up its vibration, it becomes steam and vapor, and it can actually move around even more and go into the atmosphere and separate, right? So that is kind of how consciousness works on a spectrum of density.
Right.
So it begins in the first density, which is like organic matter, rock, water, air, fire, the 4 elements. And it spends billions of years, our planet Earth, those elements interacting, fire, water, lava, gas, and that eventually created chemical life. I mean, it is chemicals, but more chemical life, microbial life. And then the microbial life becomes plant life, becomes insect life, becomes animal life, and it just continues to evolve. And that would be the second density when growth and movement starts happening. So consciousness learns that there's an environment, and there's me and the environment. So there's awareness of that. And so it can now respond to the environment in second density. And so that progresses from, a plant that can respond to the environment a bit, all the way through an animal, a pet, which we give names to, and it starts to evolve a concept of self. And then once the organism develops a conceptual understanding of what it is, I exist as a concept, that's the third density.
Right.
We call that self-awareness. So ego, the idea of what happens to me is a reflection on who I am. Those are all third density concepts.
Right.
So that's where we all are now, in a third density state. And fourth density is the density of love and oneness, where consciousness begins to learn, in third density, it learns separation. I'm a body, I'm over here, you're a body over there, so we are separate.
Right.
And so through the contrast of third density, which is a very intense density with lots of catalyst, lots of suffering, the relation I have with you, consciousness begins to realize that what I do to you, I actually do to myself on some level, that I can't cause you suffering that I don't experience in some way. Either I actively suffer by witnessing the suffering I produced, or I suppress it and it becomes guilt in the subconscious. But either way, we are causally linked, you and I. So on some level, we must be one. And so when consciousness develops a concept of oneness, it shifts into fourth density vibration, which then causes it to feel love towards others, and recognizing that actually there are no others. Everything is an extension of me. And that's a fourth density understanding. And then fifth density is what happens to after, whatever amount of time in fourth density of love and compassion. There's a tendency for this love to be a bit overzealous, overextend itself.
Right.
Where I'll do whatever I need to help you, even at the cost of myself, right? So there can be some propensity for like martyrdom and stuff. And so fifth density is when consciousness begins to learn that actually there's some wisdom to be had here, that even though you and I are one, that doesn't mean I should serve you at the cost of myself, because actually I'm no less valid than you. So there needs to be a balance here in how we relate to one another. And, you're learning certain lessons that you need for your own growth. And so I shouldn't always infringe upon that, step into your game and sort of help you learn these lessons. But part of what you're experiencing is necessary. So fifth density wisdom will only serve others when it is seen as necessary, or when it is requested, perhaps. So there develops a little bit of equilibrium there. And then sixth density is what happens when perfect balance between love and wisdom is achieved.
Okay.
And that takes some time, apparently.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
Billions of years.
Billions of years, yeah.
Right.
And that's also because there's not much catalyst in those densities. There's not much suffering.
And the seventh density is kind of unknown a little bit.
Very much.
It's just oneness is best we can say, but there's still some unknown to it. So and negative. So the negative polarity, they're moving into the fourth density. It's a love of self, but it's still a love, because you're saying fourth density is love, right? And then Ra is saying that there is negative and positive are the same, and it's all God's one thought.
Right.
So the negative polarity is moving towards love, but it's a love of self.
Yes.
And
It's the polarity of true love, which is oneness.
right.
It's a separation-based love.
Right.
So it's not I love myself because I am you. It's I love myself because I'm not you.
Right.
Which is narcissism, selfishness. Right. So the way that the negative path polarizes through fourth density is that there becomes an obsession with myself. And so I serve myself at the cost of you rather than at the benefit of you. Because all service is ultimately self-service, right?
Right.
If I serve you and I give you love and compassion and kindness, that makes me feel really good. And I also experience that love. The Course in Miracles says that the law of heaven is that giving and receiving are the same thing.
Right.
So the negative path is the opposite of that, which says I don't give to you to give to myself. I take from you to give to myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I love this idea, but it's hard for me to fathom that Ra is a social memory complex of the planet Venus. That did not have opposable thumbs. So have you visualized in your mind like what the Venetians looked like? Sometimes it's easy to talk about this stuff on higher level, but okay, first of all, it's incredibly awesome to imagine that there was life on Mars, there was life on Venus, and right now, according to Ra, there's life on other planets in the solar system that we don't even know about, right? That still, each planet has its own thing going on, kind of. Right.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure that if we could go to even the gas giants, I'm sure have some kind of life,
some different kind of life that we don't understand, but they were able to. Venus was able to move to a social memory complex and move to a sixth density quickly because they weren't very warlike. Is my understanding.
Yeah, the way Ra describes it is that it's like an experiment.
Right.
The Logos is its own experiment. Every sun, every star is its own experiment. And so each planet is a different variation of an experiment that the Logos wanted to have or try out. And then it shares that data apparently with all other Logos in the galaxy or whatever. So they all have access to, hey, this worked really well, this didn't work very well. And that's how the whole concept of the veil of forgetting came about, apparently. Is that one star system, billions of years ago, who knows, decided, hey, what if I cut off the memory of all the incarnating beings from their incarnation and see what happens?
See what happens, right.
And what they found was that it provided an atmosphere where spiritual growth was rapidly accelerated because everything was taken so seriously. And so I think Ra uses the example of a poker game. It says, if you know all the hands being played at the whole table all the time, the game isn't very fun.
Right.
There's nothing at stake. There's nothing to be risked.
True.
But when you only know what hand you have and you don't know what hands they have, well, now we have a game.
Right.
Now I can learn the game, which is a form of learning who I am, learning myself, and it accelerates this process of growth, whether positive or negative. And so that was seen as a highly successful experiment that all the other Logos, or most of them, who knows, decided to adopt. And so in that same way, one of the experiments apparently, I don't know if it's unique only to our Logos, I doubt that, but was this concept of opposable thumbs. And so Ra says that the beings that were on Mars, millions of years ago, had opposable thumbs, which caused them to become very obsessed with tool making, which led to weapon making, which led to war. So that was the outcome of that experiment. And Venus didn't have that experiment in place. There was no opposable thumb, which means that those beings didn't get obsessed with tool making as much. And so they had a much more harmonious path to evolution, and they accelerated into fourth density very quickly. And so now they're a social memory complex that exists, in the astral planes or whatever. And so we're going through this process, but we have the opposable thumbs like Mars
as well, which
apparently wiped itself out due to war and conflict.
Right.
So we're kind of seeing if maybe we're going to do the same thing or not.
Right. So this idea of spiritual evolution runs through Law of One. It's amazing that evolution is part of the design. each of these planets, each of these solar systems is constantly evolving. That's what what an incredible creation. We're not just stuck in one thing. We are, as a species, are improving. The planets are improving. The galaxy is improving. The universe is constantly improving by sharing its information. It's amazing.
It's fascinating.
So for people that haven't read it, my first question is, okay, so how do we travel faster than the speed of light? And so Ra explains. There is, so just like in science fiction, from Sirius, I guess they are able to freeze their bodies and travel long distances. And there's some species that can slingshot using the speed of light. And then on 6 density, I guess they can just go wherever they want. There's a certain level of density where you can travel by thought.
Yes.
So that's amazing. So then the exploration of Orion. So I guess that there's this pretty negative polarity species that has tried to conquer us and influence us throughout our evolution from Orion. So I want to you'd think that because of the space that our Logos doesn't like other Logos coming in and messing around with his experiment, but I guess it's okay. There's obviously the Confederation is working on that, but it's interesting. So Orion has throughout history landed and they have the planet of Orion. Is that my understanding?
Yes, it's pretty fascinating when you start to understand the mechanics of how these groups associate and how they work.
Right.
But you have to first understand the nature of the positive and negative and how they gain polarity. So there's a huge risk reward for the negative path. All polarity on the negative path has to essentially be taken by force. It has to be coerced and manipulated, So it's much more difficult to polarize on the negative path. So the difficulty in the negative, for negative entities to infringe on our free will, is that they automatically activate the possibility of the reverse effect happening. So if they decided to, let's say a negative group decided to land on our planet and try to enslave us.
Right.
Well, they would potentially create a very powerful counter reaction where the positive beings would group together and say, no, we're not going to let this happen, and we're going to band together. And this huge inspirational movement could start that would actually depolarize them because they created positive polarity in us.
Right.
So if they do something that creates a positive polarity, that depolarizes them. So they have to create a negative polarity. So they do that by it's very crafty
subtle
coercion.
Shifts.
Yes. It's like mind manipulation because they can't afford to let you know that they're trying to take advantage of you because that activates your desire to retract in a sense.
Right.
So you would do that by going into the positive polarity.
So Ra is claiming, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, that's about all I was going to say.
No, but Ra is claiming that things like the 10th commandment, 10 commandments, the aliens from Orion, because there would be a God would not say thou shalt not.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The 10 commandments come from Orion, and it was a subtle manipulation.
Yep.
Even though Moses is this really positive, as Ra explains, was super positive, he was being given information that when I read that, I was like, oh my God.
It's a mind blower, right?
That's a mind blower, right? That's amazing.
Well, and the reason that it's, these negative entities are extremely smart, extremely crafty.
Yes.
They're very good at what they do. And so not only do they have, psychic abilities that would blow our minds, but they can read your thoughts, they can read your intentions and all that kind of stuff. And so it makes perfect sense from a negative perspective that that's what they would do. Because again, they're not going to show up and be like, hey, we're gods, worship us, we're going to enslave you, because that would just create a counter reaction. They have to sort of work their way in through the back door in a sneaky fashion. So to make a 10 commandments, for example, saying you shall not do this, you shall not do that. Well, what is that going to begin creating? What's the fruit that's going to produce? It's going to create a culture of guilt.
A guilt, exactly.
And guilt is the primary weapon of the negative path. So they're trying to get guilt worked into the system of that religion, which they did very successfully.
Right. It worked very well.
It did.
So according to Ra, the Earth is cordoned off essentially.
Yeah.
And because they're trying to protect us from these negative entities. And there is a literal thought war that only four major, there's a confederation, which is a group of different planetary entities that all work together, and only four at a time will work to protect the Earth because it's so difficult and hard, and that's the way that Ra explained it. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah.
So right now at this moment, there's entities monitoring the Earth, and we're cordoned off to protect us from the influence of Orion.
Yes, it's sort of like the answer to the Fermi paradox.
Right. Why aren't we seeing that? Thank you. Why aren't we seeing because we can't right now. It would not be good for us. Is that correct?
We don't understand like what the nature of higher intelligence is like. Mm-hmm. We just have our little context and viewpoint, and so we think that applies to everything. But not only are we not alone, but we're like in a little tiny playpen in consciousness kindergarten being supervised by adults.
Right, yeah.
And so the positive path, the most important thing for the positive path is to not infringe on free will. So it actually depolarizes them to infringe upon free will.
Right.
So like they're not going to come down and be like, hey, here's all these lessons you need to learn. Let me tell you all about it.
Right.
Like that would infringe on our natural organic evolution. And so they know that the whole purpose of the universe is for the creator to have this authentic experience. And so they want to allow all entities to go through the natural process of evolution uninfringed upon by outsiders. And so they purposefully do not want to contact us and give us all their technology and tell us all their information, because they want us to first learn the lessons ourselves. And, you know, they're not going to come save our planet for us. They want us to learn the ways of love and oneness and save ourselves. So it's from their perspective, it's like, well, we need to watch this play out and honor their free will. If they want to destroy themselves, we're not going to stop them from doing that, because that's not free will. But at the same time, if there is a desire for entities on this planet to be free and to expand and to learn the ways of love, if that desire is present, then they're allowed to help us a bit. And so they'll do that through channeled works or inspirations, or they'll leave little breadcrumb trails for us, but they want us to go eat the breadcrumbs ourselves, right? They're not going to plop them in our mouth for us.
Right.
And so that's kind of the nature of the positive path. And so you have the positive and the negative, which are sort of working in opposition on this planet. And so the negative path, it's to their benefit to make our planet become a negative planet.
Right.
So they want to influence the ways of selfishness and greed and all that. But again, they can't do it in an open way that would potentially ruin everything and cause a counter reaction. So they do it through governmental systems, and they influence the powers that be. And we see that in our politics and big pharma and medicine and all kinds of, prison system. And so both polarities of higher intelligent beings are sort of working behind the curtains, trying to coerce us into one way or the other. But we are seeing at the same time extraterrestrial entities appearing more and more often.
Yeah.
And it's actually happening in such a way that the government is coming out now and saying, hey, here's all these public domain UFO encounters our military has had. We're going to put these out there. And I don't know if you're very familiar with David Wilcock and all of that.
He's written about the Law of One too. So
yes. Mm-hmm. So he's behind, an investigation of people that are coming forward who work for these extra government sources who've been used in these systems that are saying, hey, we've actually been, extraterrestrials have been contacting us for a long time, and we actually have some of their technology we've back engineered, and the government's been keeping it a secret from the population for a very long time. There's bases on the backside of the moon and stuff like that, and there's like 100-year program right now coming out where they're slowly releasing information to the public to ease us into this next era where we understand, not only are we not alone in the universe, but like we've been in this little corner facing the wall thinking we're all alone, and there's an entire playground of other people behind us that have been watching us, waiting for us to turn around and acknowledge them. And so like, they're not, these higher planetary civilizations, they have certain rules in place, right? Like, we're not going to contact a civilization that's still going to war with itself. Like, they're so far down the totem pole of understanding and intelligence that like, we need them to meet certain criteria to join our confederation.
Right.
And we need them to prove they're intelligent enough to even have a conversation with us and to agree with our mission statement, right? And to be on board with what we're doing here. And so we're just kind of going to monitor until they get their shit together, so to speak. And then we can start making little semblances of contact. And so the example I like to give is like, imagine what an higher density being's job is like to communicate with us, right? They don't even speak language. Right. They're so far advanced, they're speaking telepathically and stuff.
They have to actually open their mouths and utter words.
Yes. So like, imagine how we communicate with animals, right?
Right.
A dog or a cat has some capacity to understand words and signs, but they basically just speak energy. Right. So if you really want to communicate with a dog, you have to give off the energy you want. And so there's very little communication that really can take place. We can have some relationship, but we can't have a relationship like I do human to human, right? On the same token, a fourth density or fifth density being is just vastly beyond our ability to comprehend in intelligence. So the way they communicate with us, for them, is like us talking to a dog or something, but to us, we're like, oh my gosh, this is so intelligent, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting. They even say that they went to Eisenhower. There's a comment in the Law of One where Eisenhower was visited and he was like, I don't think that we're ready for this. Eisenhower's like, I don't think we're ready for this.
Can you imagine
imagine Eisenhower was actually in contact on some level in some way, and he was like, because they liked Eisenhower, they thought he would be a good person to talk to, and it was like,
right.
He's like, I don't think we're ready for this. He's probably right, but
there's so much happening behind the scenes that it would just infuriate the public if they knew. And I don't know everything.
Just from the lack of us knowing, yeah.
It's what they've been keeping from us.
Right.
And this is like Bob Lazar, that whole, he came out in the 90s because he's just a nerdy scientist kid who loves science and was like being asked by this secret government organization in the desert of Nevada to back engineer this craft they found. And he was like, wait, why are we keeping this a secret? Like this technology could literally save the world. Like hunger, poverty, starvation, disease, famine, gone in a day. Like this is not only a travesty to humanity, but it's a travesty to science.
Right.
Think about how many brilliant minds are being kept from this information, this technology that we could use to back engineer this. But because it needs to be such a secret, because the government's keeping it for themselves for all the different reasons they would want to do that, he was like, no, this isn't right. Like, I feel morally wrong for doing this. So he came out on the news and everything and was saying all this back in the 90s. Like, hey, I work at this base called S4 in Nevada. He took his friends out, for God's sakes, and started filming the UFOs test flights at night. And, all of it's on the documentary.
Right.
Like, there's this object glowing and hovering, and they're like, oh my God, what is that? He's like, that's the thing I'm working on. Like, so you have Bob Lazar, people like this, Joe Rogan has had all these guests on lately.
Amazing. Yeah.
Incredible. Like the Navy pilot, I can't remember his name, but he and 5 other Navy pilots witnessed this tic-tac-toe hovercraft
that's moving impossibly fast. There's no way that we could do anything like that. Yeah.
And they watched it for 5 minutes, circling it. He got within 2,000 feet of the thing, and he said it was shaped like a giant tic-tac.
They asked Ra about a lot of these different things, and sometimes there may be an alien race that just wants us to know about infinity. That Ra is, some of them is purposeful, some of it's being secret, but we're seeing more of it. Ra is saying that some of that's purposeful. Some of them appearing is purposeful.
And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Right.
If these higher beings wanted to make contact with us, they're not just going to park their UFO on the front lawn of the White House and freak everybody out. They're going to slowly allow us to see their craft flying around and open our awareness to the fact that we're not alone in the universe.
Right.
And that's what Ross says, right? Is he's like, sometimes they just appear in order to open the people to the mysterious and the infinite possibilities that are out there. You know, you have these crazy events like the Phoenix Lights.
Right.
It's like, how do you explain that? Thousands of people see this gigantic thing floating, these lights in the sky, you know, in this V formation just hovering. There's no way to explain away all these UFO sightings. And, you know, this Navy pilot guy who saw this Tic Tac UFO was saying that when they got back to base, their commander informed them, like, actually, we've been seeing these craft for a long time. We don't know what they are.
We don't know what they are.
He said on the East Coast, the pilots out there are seeing these craft that are shaped like a square inside of a circle, like a giant floating square, a circle with a square inside of it. And they just zip in and out of the places. They see 60 some odd of them a year.
Right.
And so it's like, what is happening? Like, we obviously don't have gravity distortion technology yet. These craft have no propulsion system. They're able to basically teleport in an instant. There is no technology on Earth that can do that. So how do we explain that? And in my opinion, the only way to explain it is that, there are other entities in the universe, and they're very extremely intelligent. And so they're not just going to like kick down the front door, but they're making us aware of their presence in a way that won't freak our whole society out. But I think 100 years from now, it's very likely that there'll be some kind of open contact that the world will become aware of with higher species that are trying to let us know, hey, we come in peace, but there's a whole lot of shit we need to make you guys aware of.
You just hope it's not Orion that shows up first, right?
I mean, they already are, apparently.
They already are, right. So, obviously, within the law of one, both the negative and positive are a part of the universe, but there's a part of me that wants to see this planet move in the positive polarity. And that's my own, because I'm on the positive polarity. So what can we do to help this planet, you and I right now, with the message that we have? Is there anything that I'm going to love, and I'm going to spread this message, but maybe we can multiply this or exponentially with the people listening? Is there some way that we can shift this planet to a higher polarity, to a positive polarity, to a higher density, so that we can join the planets, the Confederation? Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that? What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. I think Ra goes into pretty good detail on this in Law of One, but the idea is like, if you want to be of service in a greater, in a wider sense, then your only real responsibility is you know, to expand your consciousness, to increase your polarity, because you are a unique frequency in consciousness that contributes to the planetary frequency as a whole. And that's actually why our planet shifted into fourth density in 2012, according to Ra, is that 51% of the population became positively oriented, so that the whole planetary frequency could now be mathematically considered a fourth density planet.
And Orion's like, oh!
Right. They're not happy about it. But
we've been working on this forever, man.
Everything's foiled.
Right. So, I could keep on this. I mean, Ra talks about Bigfoot. There's so many little that are unimportant. Even Ra says, "Yeah, this is not really important," but I'll tell you the answer. A lot of the questions they ask. So I could keep on talking, but when I posted on my group that I was going to interview you, a lot of people were separate from the Law of One, really loved your teaching on astral projection. And I did too, because I've really, I've tried with music a lot, and your lesson was kind of like, avoid the music, listen for the sound. And there are people on my group that have bilocated through your teaching. So so I wanted to get an idea of some of your astral projection adventures. Do you see, one question on the group I promised I'd ask, do you see a plasma bubble when you astrally project?
I can't say I do, no.
Okay. Do you see an astral cord when you astral project?
I've never seen the astral cord.
Never seen the astral cord? Tell me a little bit more about your experiences in experimenting with astral projection.
Well, I probably don't have as much experience as people think I do.
Right.
I'm not like some crazy projection master or something. I'm actually not very gifted at it naturally.
Right.
It took me, I mean, I learned how to do it relatively quick, but there's some people, man, that they're like, oh, I've been lucid dreaming my whole life. It's so easy.
Right.
I just do it. For me, I have to work really hard at it. So I've had, probably less than 50 astral projections, which is a good amount, of course.
Yeah, that's actually really, really good.
But, there's people with thousands of them.
Right.
And they do it almost every day. But it's not like you need thousands of projections to consider yourself an expert at something like that. But I just help people learn how to do it.
Right.
I'm not like one of those astral projection teachers that talks about how to do retrievals and, travel to other parallel realities and go see your relatives and stuff. I'm not that advanced to teach people how to do that stuff. I can just tell you how to do it and pretty simple, effective ways to do it. So the experiences I've had I've had some really interesting ones for sure. But, there's the whole concept of focus 2 and focus 3. Focus 2 being like your own dream world that is all in your mind.
Right.
Focus 3 being the actual astral planes where there are other incarnate entities that you can actually communicate with and learn from and stuff. And so I've had very few focus 3 projections. I think I've had maybe 5 or 6 that I can feel comfortable saying was definitely a focus 3 projection.
Right.
Most of them are focus 2 or focus 1. Focus 1 being like the real time zone. Like I'm actually in my room watching myself, looking at my curtains and stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of been the realm of my experience.
Very interesting. And it's fun to explore. It's just interesting. So popular topic on my channel is meditation. And so that you talk about it. Do you think that the Law of One has given us any lessons on proper ways of meditation that can speed up our process? Have you used any teachings from Law of One for meditation wise?
Yeah. Ra talks about the concept of balancing quite a bit. Ra talks about using the concept of fasting to spiritually polarize. And he talks about the idea of going on a fast. Doesn't really matter what kind of fast, just something that's challenging.
Right.
But usually food or something like that. And while you're fasting, you're using the level of desire you have to, whether you're really hungry or whatever, and you're directing it in the direction of an intention of yours to learn a certain lesson, like maybe self-love or worthiness or whatever the balancing act you're trying to perform is, whatever chakra is blocked. And you can use that energy as a very powerful way to polarize and to open that chakra. And so I've used a couple of those teachings he gives, because he does go into pretty good detail on it. And it's all, meditation is something they stress a lot in Law of One.
Yeah. Going
inside of yourself and investigating what distortions you have in place.
Right. And distortions is a word commonly used by Rod, the word distortion, right?
Yes. And it has sort of a dual meaning.
Yeah.
Ra uses the term distortion in a loose sense, which basically just means any variation of intelligent infinity. Meaning like intelligent energy itself is pure, and it can distort itself in ways to produce matter or beliefs or objects or ideas or thoughts. So he'll say like the first distortion, meaning the first law, which is free will, right? So, but another level of distortion would be like a negative belief system, like a negative core belief, let's say, that I'm not worthy. Rob would say that's a distortion, something that creates suffering, and you have to go inside of yourself to find that belief and do the necessary work to transcend it and purify that distortion, which then opens that chakra. So like worthiness, for example, he says is the pineal gland.
Right.
Worthiness is what activates your third eye. And so when you purify the distortion of unworthiness, then your chakra becomes activated. And then the powers of that chakra become more available to you.
Very interesting. So this has been a genuine pleasure. I've learned a lot, and I've really enjoyed sharing this information. Just for everybody to know, you offer counseling sessions on your website at aaronabke.com. And you also have an online seminar, emotional guidance system. That's what, October. When is that going to be? October
Sunday, October 27th.
The 27th. And you can get it information at aaronabke.com/online workshop. Correct. And so I think I'm going to be definitely checking that out. And I want to thank you. I'm so grateful for your teachings and helping me along in my process and providing knowledge and helping me to understand some of this stuff. I'm speaking for a lot of other people that what you've brought has really helped them. You're raising the consciousness of this planet. So thank you, Aaron. It's a wonderful thing. So keep on going on. I'll check out every one of your videos. This has been awesome. I'm sure I could suck another 3 or 4 hours from you, but thank you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
This stuff.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and thanks for the fun conversation.
For sure.